brush strokes, and the yard she leaves is permanent. She will scar you with her eyes closed, but she won't mind it, no, you'll beg for it. In the morning, when the sun goes, you know you made the soldier's bed, and the one that's left behind was made up of tiny brush strokes, and the yard she leaves is permanent. She will scar you with her eyes closed, but you won't mind it, no, you'll beg for it. In the morning when the sun goes, you will know you made a soldier's bed, and the one that's left behind was violent. Go Paisley! Thank you. Is it panel time?
It's your panel time now. We're going to play a recording.
All right. Folks want to come gather around. I think we're ready to start our programming.
I know what it was and saw what it was 30 years ago. I became an electrician. Proud of it. I'm a single mother of 6 daughters. 5 daughters, 1 granddaughter. They're all my kids. I want to be able to tell them that what I worked for was worth something. Tonight, they're trying to intimidate us. They're trying to put fear in our hearts.
We'll do it.
They cannot do it. You know why? Because we do not fear. We came from nothing. We came from nothing. There's families here that didn't even know what it was to have meat on the tables. And we have everything. If you're going to try to sweep us under the rug, we're not going to lay you. We're not just a number. We're not just a person. We're a family. We're a community. We're Apple Park. On that note, I'm going to tell you guys, if you guys are worried about your safety, if you have fires, and I'm going to say straight out, if you have fires, if you have burns, stay behind our lines. Okay, but we always have that person. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you straight up, if I get caught, I'm fucked. But I'm still going to be there in the front line because you know what? This is what my parents came and fought for. This is what I fight for every day, telling my kids, if I can do it, if I can be an electrician, inside journeyman, undocumented, immigrant, that didn't even finish junior high, you can do that and much more. And my daughter, thank God, one of the, out of 6, but she graduated, and I'm going to say this, I'm a boast. It's wrong, but I'm a boast. She graduated with 2 diplomas and 4 medals, and she introduced a whole new recycling program to Logan Academy. She makes me proud. I hope to make my blood proud. I am the daughter of a Oaxaqueño, and the daughter of a Yaqui India from Sonora. I am illegal, I am Mexican, but I am family with Apple Park. Tonight, we fight for family. Tonight, there is no gender. From north to south, from east to west, you're Mexican, you're Hispanic, you're American, you're Filipino, you're Asian, you're Indian. I don't care. But I'll be damned if at 32 someone tells me what to do, where I can go, who I can talk to. I'll be damned. You know why? Because I'm illegal, yeah, but I managed to do what a lot of these people are scared of. When I used to paint, they call me Black Coolie, because I will always be reborn. My children, I left a legacy, and I'm not fighting for me. I'm fighting for my mother. I'm fighting for my grandmother. I'm fighting for the people that came before us. You know what? Tonight is a night that we remember, and we hope to see solidarity. I'm in us, and everybody in this park, we thank you. Yeah. We thank you. Thank you.
So that was Queen Jessica Mendez. Queen. Some of us are like trying to hold it together right now? No, actually I'm okay.
Okay,
Can
yeah.
people hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Because I feel so weird with the mic. She died actually on Mother's Day last year, and so it'll be a year in May. So she's like in this room all the time. You can listen to her and see her photos. Her baby is here. He's sleeping right now. Yeah, I think as hard as it is to like be with her words all the time, sorry. It's so important because I think like when we have conversations about what does art mean, art and activism, art and resistance, all this stuff, like we think about it in like these very kind of like they're just ideas floating around us, orbiting around us. But for me, and I think a lot of us in this room, when we think about cultural production, cultural work, we're really, really deeply connected and committed to like the corporeal, spiritual stakes that are embedded into this work. That like you risk your body, you risk your spirit, you risk your energy, your children, your like the stakes are so high, and you lose so much. You actually do all the time, every day. And so I think it's very important to get grounded in words like Queen's words so that we're moving into this conversation from that place. Because that's what she's describing for us, right? She's describing what is at stake for her. And she grew up in that neighborhood. She worked that neighborhood. She knew where everything was in the neighborhood. If you needed anything, she was the person you went to. She is the queen. Like that is her neighborhood. And for her to have the kind of bravery that she did in the very vulnerable, in multiple ways, vulnerable position she was in was remarkable. And we learn a lot from her all the time. And so I want to start this conversation from that place, that when we're thinking about making art, we're thinking about what kind of risk does it take and what kind of protection does it offer, or what kind of support does it lend to people who will become our comrades, right? So with that, I'm going to stop talking, and we have amazing folks sitting here with us, and so we'll just maybe go around and you want to introduce yourselves. Like, I think obviously name, pronouns. Yes, anybody else? Yes. And tell us what you do. Tell us what you do and kind of where you do it. So we start to also, yes. Yes.
Yeah, we have.
So they can help, they can build a geography. And so I want us all to like remember, where are these folks? Because there's so many people all over LA doing this work. And so that's a goal for us to just like pack away. Like we want to make sure we meet someone today in our neighborhood we didn't know before that is going to help us engage in this work. And so, yeah, where do you work? What do you do? And then as an artist, like how do you integrate an art practice with this work that you are so committed to, and where do you see those things kind of joining together?
In 2 to 3 minutes.
In 2 to 3 minutes. And we'll let this flow, right? Like
Yeah, we'll introduce
go
ourselves.
around for a first little taste, like a little appetizer, and then we'll come back and dig, we'll dig into those questions even more.
Hi everyone, my name is Carla Orndorff. I'm really humbled and honored that we're all here together. Honestly, this exhibition has brought a lot of friends and comrades and new connections, old connections together. So I'm really grateful for the community knowledge production, the work that really went into piecing this together. I know that it was an emotional experience to, pull from the wisdom of hundreds who are resting upon thousands and thousands of others who have contributed and given their life force to housing justice movement in Los Angeles. So just to introduce, I have if you know me, you know I have piles of photos that I roll with at all times. I'm deeply inspired by the archive that Echo Park has created. I know it only tells a little bit of a full lived history, but I organize with Aetna Street Solidarity, which was born in resistance to a shelter that was city run by what we like to call Starvation Army. We call them Starvation Army because they cruelly evicted people from the shelter for crimes like doing laundry for others, for feeding others, for daring to take care of each other. So we're really grounding this conversation around we live in a world that is actively criminalizing people for caring for each other. That is the context in which we understand mutual aid and also our duty, our historical duty, to care for each other at any and all costs. The risks and stakes are very high, but to do nothing is even a greater risk. And so more and more of us each day take on new commitments that are really born out of relationship with one another. And I'll just share, I will get into it a little bit, but I wanted to share the artwork of some of our members from Aetna Street. If you go to Aetna Street now, it's fenced off completely after an inside safe operation that the mayor did that ended with guns drawn at a number of our heads. People, I was going to say survived, but not everybody did. A number of our friends passed away, moved on to other streets, are still around, are still fighting. But this is called The Wheel of Life that was created by Ron. Oh yeah, thank you. And what I'll do is these are photos that we reproduce over and over again. So there's hundreds of images within our archive, and it's all meant to be given away. So anything you see here, if it speaks to you, take it. That's what it's for. This is Tony, who is committed to feeding everyone on the block and really informed how we approach food. And so each project, okay.
The art.
Oh, the art. Thank you. So the way that we do food is really inspired by Tony, who had a pantry at his spot and was dedicated to feeding everybody at all hours of the day. He would always get a plate of food at his spot, which made him also the most targeted person in Van Nuys at one point because he had a pantry, because he did not have access to refrigeration. The city and LA Sanitation labeled him as a threat to public health and safety. And so every single week, his pantry was raided, the food was thrown away, we tell these stories because it's really important to know that the programs that people have built are built out of struggle. It's deeply humbling to us what people have done every day, right? These are everyday acts of resistance in a city where 6 unhoused people die every single day, where over 20 of these operations happen throughout the city at the same time, meaning 20 communities with their own lived histories, with their own, all the stories that people have to tell, all the work that people do every day to fend for life gets dumped in the trash. And if you have any feelings about it, if you have an opinion about it, we've had people who were arrested for shrugging because it was seen as an act of defiance. So we've had people taken just for shrugging at a sanitation officer. So these are just some of the everyday. But I'll share more images. I'll end with Green Eyes, who is one of our beloved members, who is part of our community nights, and she had lived on Aetna Street for many years and got really sick and was able to temporarily get into housing, but was routinely kicked out, and just before she passed away was kicked out for not returning to her room after 3 days. The reason she didn't return to her room was because she was in the hospital, and the caseworkers knew it. They knew that she was in the hospital. This is how unforgiving and brutal this system is. It doesn't matter what the reason is. There's no excuses. So she lost her spot. ended up a block away from Aetna Street and passed away in her tent. It was her greatest fear. She dedicated the last weeks of her life towards advocating for herself, fighting for her life and the life of others, and asked us to film every interaction with city officials, every interaction with sanitation and LAPD, because she wanted her story. She wanted it to be part of a record. And so the work that our community does, I think we do we archive everything we do because I think we ourselves would not believe what had happened to us if we didn't actually do this work, take this on ourselves. And so we do all kinds of activities, but you know, it's all in the name of community defense, and you know what we call mutual aid. But mutual aid is really just it's practices that evolve as we go further and further to the heart of what we're up against. And we know that we're up against a whole lot, but the creativity, the like culture, what Will was talking about, like the culture that we create in the process is a part of a liberatory, like this is like what we have, right? And it is what we will, so it's defending that is sacred. It's sacred for each and every one of us. So that's a little bit about our work, and we'll get into more photos and stuff, but I'll pass it on to my comrades.
Hi everybody, my name is Fernando Isaí. I was born in Oaxaca, but I've lived in LA since I was less than a year old. I am an organizer, I'm an artist, I'm a teaching artist, I'm an organizer with the KTown Tenants Union. I am an organizer with Comité Oaxacali here in LA, with Proyecto NACPA, which is mostly Mexico City-based artists, Mexican artists for Palestine. And I'm an organizer with Oaxaca con Palestina, a collective in Oaxaca, also organized and building solidarity for Palestine. There's a lot to talk about. I will try to be very, very brief as an introduction. As a teaching artist, one of my kind of like the principles that I kind of revolve around and like try to keep at center are teaching tools. Not necessarily tools to make a pretty painting, pretty drawing, etc. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You know, there's the traditional historical way of learning art just by copying is great, amazing. But I'm more interested in teaching tools to process, understand, and intervene with the self and with the world. And I think that this is absolutely necessary if you're going to have any sort of freedom. If you cannot understand, process, and or intervene with yourself and what's going on with your life, and then thereby with the rest of the world, you cannot actively participate or even feel or strive for freedom. And so this is what I try to teach in my workshops. They're usually very straightforward, very simple, and with very cheap materials, and approach concepts, and approach ideas, approach liberation practices in a very tangible, accessible way, where like you don't realize you're doing it until at the end of at the end of it, we made something different, and you can step back and be like, oh, wait a minute, I did this other thing while I was literally just playing, right? So yes, I'm gonna stop there because I'm gonna keep going.
Hi everyone, my name is Sam Lutzker. I'm a researcher at UCLA. I was one of the co-authors of the After Echo Park Lake report, so did not have anything to do with this exhibit, so it's been really lovely to see and re-see through new eyes just the experience of the park and the community there, and also the fight. And so I think I'm here in part, a lot of my research is with people in vehicles. I'm here to provide a little bit of context on the county's Pathway Home program, which gave rise to the request for proposals, the Artwashing request for proposals, I should say, which was thankfully shut down, it seems. Okay, so maybe not. Okay, so I haven't checked in on it, but most of my research is in LA City, so I should say I have not observed a Pathway Home like sweep at all, but they have public statistics, which I just wanted to briefly critique, because I think there's some ways, again, in making data accessible and making the way we question data accessible. This isn't something that needs to be confined just to academics or people who have a background in statistics, we can all think critically about some of these numbers. So I'm just gonna, go through them, a few of them, question sort of, like what they tell us and what they don't tell us, and also connect that a little bit to the broader process of erasure that I think the request for proposals was, basically tasked with doing. So as of February 10th, 2025, LA County's Pathway Home program has had 34 what they call encampment resolutions, removing 677 RVs, moving a little over 1,200 people into interim housing, and with 233 of those individuals now permanently housed. Now, this reads like a press release, of course, because we don't know, when they say they've served people with this program, for example, we have to ask, what does that mean? Does that mean that someone experienced a sweep and they got their RV taken and they were served? Or does that mean that someone actually got into interim housing? So these numbers, even like the 1,200 people into interim housing, we have to ask how many people were scattered prior to that. So any success rate that you have for one of these, what they call success rate, you should question immediately, like, what is your denominator? What is the total number of people in this space who were negatively, and some who were positively impacted by your intervention into the space, by the sweep, by the housing effort, whatever it is, whatever mixture of carcerality and care, because they love to mix these two things up in ways that are confusing. It makes you feel like you have to, be punished in order to get services. This is on purpose, I would say. It's by design. And then the other question I would have for them too is of the people who have actually exited the program. This is a big issue. So this is something I study in my other work. People who fall out of permanent supportive housing programs back onto the streets. What is it about these programs once you get in there that isn't working for people, that's pushing people out, and I think we should take seriously that there's these claims of carcerality in these programs from people who have lived through carceral systems, who have been in prison, who understand what that feels like. If this is re-triggering them, we should be having conversations about that open publicly with officials. And I too often think this data comes down to something like a press release rather than an open conversation. So like, for example, they say of the people who've exited their interim housing program, 63% of them are permanently housed. A few things we can question there. What does it mean to be permanently housed? The other things we can question, of the remaining people, the 37% who weren't permanently housed, who exited, did they all, return to homelessness? What does that look like? Because right now the county is saying that of those 30-something%, only roughly a fifth of them are back to homelessness. And that's because how they count that is if you've exited their program and disappear, you are not homeless. If you've exited their program and they count you on the streets again, you are homeless. So they assume, in a way that benefits themselves in their own PR project, that all these people, now they've self-resolved, it's fine. They don't need the 677 RVs we've taken away. In fact, all of those were, inhospitable, which frankly, I just don't buy, having spent time with people who live in these vehicles. So I'll just close by saying, last week I walked into the free portion of Freeze LA. I didn't go to Freeze LA, but I walked into the free portion of it because there's an artist there who I've been in conversation with, Dominique Moody, who has like this really cool project called The Nomad, and I took a little flyer of it. It's basically like a tiny home on wheels that she built, actually out in Altadena, that really traces her family's broader lineage of the African-American story of both forced displacement and also freedom in mobility. And I thought that this sort of piece is the exact counterpoint to the art washing and erasure that we saw with the Pathway Home program RFP, in that it actually brings a perspective, a nomadic perspective, an alternative to the commoditized private settler colonial property relations that we live in, into a space of the West Side that's primarily single family homes, and sort of tries to, in a way that, is ultimately polite to the broader art establishment, but still tries to push that conversation of, what is housing, what about people's self-determination and so forth. And I think it's just really telling. I'll just say that in private conversations, she said that the city of Santa Monica was very worried that this would look like an encampment. And I think that that's very telling
in the sort of assumptions that public officials from the county to the city to other cities like Santa Monica, the sort of assumptions that they bring to these operations, to these sweeps. And I think it also we can connect it to the results or lack of results that, that these operations have, that they displace many people even if they house some. And really, we have to think more critically about their statistics, because even if they house some, what does that look like a year down the line? How are these people experiencing that housing? Has their autonomy decreased? Has it increased? These are the sort of questions that I think researchers want to ask, but I think that public officials, those in power, they want a much simpler, neater story. And so I just encourage anyone, I think anyone here can be their own sort of archaeologists of data, go into these websites, critique them, speak truth to power. And I want to commend the artists who I think did a really good job with that in getting some of these answers, how, even if they were insufficient ultimately, I saw what the county responded to you all with. I think like that process is at least, it pushes them, it shows that, we're organized, that hey, just because we don't have, all your spreadsheets or access to HMIS, it doesn't mean that we can't speak back to that and speak back to that erasure. So yeah, thank you all. Excited to learn more and talk. Yeah. Should I just put this mic down?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the mic stand. Is this going to do a bad thing?
That can work.
Okay.
We'll see. Okay, greetings everyone. My name is Ndindi Kitonga. I'm really quite honored to be here, to bear witness. I know some people were here at Echo Park Lake on that last date. I have an interesting experience with it because I was at Echo Park Lake, but I was on the periphery. And so my only memory, quite frankly, are the screams and the yelling, like I couldn't see anything deep in the night. And so that's my memory of it always. And so to bear witness like this is I think, really important. So I'm an educator here also as an organizer with Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid, or PUMA. We're a small, thank you, small mutual aid collective. But actually, maybe I'll use a minute to explain how interesting it is that I'm in this place again, because like I said, I'm an educator and I'm in the teacher-educator space, so I spend a whole lot of time educating people who want to be teachers. I'm not an artist. I'm actually a science teacher, but I've spent maybe the past 20 years or so trying to support artists and what type of things artists need and should be around. And so about 11 or 12 years ago, when Obama was in office, whatever it was, and this is a cautionary tale of neoliberalism and how these institutions work. There's a place called the Obama Zone, and so these were disenfranchised areas, communities that required support, and so they were like, hey, if you want to be a teacher, come on in. And so I won't name the university, but I ended up with a position there, and we had a partnership with the LA Phil. So for about 12 years of my life, I trained LA Phil professional musicians, and their purpose was interesting. They wanted to come to Skid Row for White Savior. I'm sorry for the shockingness of it. It was not, but I wanted to start with this bit. And ended up actually, the last time I was in this space was for that purpose.
In this space?
Yes. Yes, I won't name the organizations or what have you at this time. And so for those 8 or so years, even more than that, it was, let's go to Skid Row. We have the high art, we have the know-how, and I should say, first of all, they abandoned the project when COVID hit. There was this expectation that you just drop in and people will want the art. Day one of the art making happening, it didn't go the way it wanted, and then all the energy was spent on, why don't these people know how good our art is? Right? So, and art making. So,
I can't do that.
and I'm sorry, I'm trying to offer the very respectable version of the situation.
Keep it real.
Yes. But that's what it was. So the cautionary tale here is, that you can have institutions that throw money at projects, even find resources in individuals, even find community-minded people. I think that's how I found myself in that position, but still not have the orientation, mindset, philosophical framework of, I think the reason that we're all here, the communities that we're talking about in Aetna Street, the community that was built in Echo Park, the communities we support in Palms. And so I think the difference between what that project was and what I'm involved in now is that people-centered aspect of it. It's the complete affirmation of people's autonomy and the understanding that they can do for self what they want to do for self, and that their expressions don't need to be filtered through all of these, I guess I'll call it a machine, and institutions. Maybe I'll stop there because I know we have more to talk about.
Hello, my name is Paisley. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a transgender man from Hawaii originally. I moved to LA about 10 years ago to go to USC Film School. I got my MFA in film production, and I've been living in an RV for the past almost 4 years. And since moving into this RV, I've created an independent media program called RV TV.
Yeah.
We love it. Some fans. It's currently online, and it's an independent journalism program where I get the word on the street out to folks from my perspective as a guy in his RV. I also am a musician, as some of you might have heard me playing music earlier. And really, since I've been in the RV and not having to pay rent, I've been able to work full-time as a musician and be able to live and survive off my music and off my art. And it's something that in organizing with as well Aetna Street Solidarity, I have just met a lot of artists on the street. Like the street is filled with artists in all different formats. And many people who are on the streets because they want to create art. They're like, I tried working in a job that, was killing my soul, and I just want to make art, and I can't afford rent and make art, so I'm going to make art. And so that's something that I think that connection is very real, and it's something that I, knew but have learned and has been confirmed. And maybe I'll just leave it at that, because I think we have some questions to get into, but yeah.
Can you hear me? Is this on? Yeah. Thank you so much. I have a lot of questions, but I think I actually kind of just wanted to go back to a word that I heard, intervene. And I wanted to think about intervention and complicity. And in the action that many folks in this room took by signing a letter to push against the assumption that there would be broad complicity with the request of this project, that type of intervention is just one type, right? And so I think I would love to know, how, and maybe we can start with you actually, because I'm curious about the scope. What is the scope of intervention for you? And then if we can think together as artists and folks who teach artists and support artists in this universe of working on housing and working on really the right to remain in one's place and on one's land as a tenant, either housed or unhoused. Where do we see opportunities for an intervention right now as artists? What are the terrains? What are the places? I love what you bring, Sam, because I think that helps us see some of those opportunities. Right? And so from your perspective, the folks you work most closely with, the territory you're most engaged with, where are those opportunities for intervention, for cultural work and cultural production? And anybody can jump in, or if you want to start, what do you think?
I have two examples. One that jumps to mind that I'm not sure if it makes sense, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I was having a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and she was telling me that she was going through a lot. She felt like she was getting choked, and she was just she was going through a lot of anxiety, and I wasn't able to talk with her, listen to her. And then I told her, what I said to her was it sounds like you've been in trauma response in an ongoing way, and that is exhausting. And you need to find a way to step out, step back, hold some space for yourself, and have some patience and grace for yourself. And she was like, obviously you know exactly what I'm talking about, and you can hear exactly what I'm saying, and actually tell me what's happening. And that's a kind of intervention. Be like, hold on, let me step out from this, right? A completely kind of a different intervention, which I think leads to an answer that makes sense for the group, is as a tennis union organizer, we get a lot of people that show up at a moment of crisis, right? Because they've got eviction notices, because they're dealing with harassment, because they're trying to take their parking, because they're trying to, raise their rent, etc. Hi, how's it going? So and then how do we get that? How we listen to people's needs and offer the support to help people out, but then how do we transition from this is a symptom of a much larger issue? And how do we go from, as organizers, as tenants, as people living in this world that is not made for us, how do we go from dealing with a crisis and planning and organizing for a better world, right? How do we intervene so that we're not spending our time putting out fire after fire after fire, so that we're actually making headway, building solidarity, and being able to work together and realize, hey, I love that you're all proud of your identity. I love, for me, I am so happy, I'm so privileged that I was born in Oaxaca. I'm just gonna say that. But at the same time, I am not going to let the identity politics divide all of us when we're all literally in a class struggle, right? So how do we help intervene and help make that cross onto, yes, you're in crisis, we need to figure this out, and it will get figured out. But then how can we work towards intervening at larger scale so that nobody has to go through this?
When the city decided to basically institutionalize sweeps on Aetna Street, when they put the shelter down, they also created a special enforcement zone, which meant every Thursday, people on Aetna Street had a date with sanitation, LAPD, and LASA, which provided an opportunity and a real intervention where we knew where the city was going to be each and every week, what time, and people got really fucking creative and said, we're going to disrupt this, we're going to protest this, we're going to figure out whatever the fuck we have, even if we have nothing, and we're going to do something about it each and every single week for 3 years. That was through the practice of that, being like, we're going to be here every Thursday, we're going to film every second, that the city is fucking with other people's stuff and throwing things away. We're going to document the hell out of that to start, but also then think about what can we do otherwise. And I love that you brought in the press release, because that's usually where the story begins and ends, right? And that's how we've also been trained to think about the city's relationship with houseless people. And I'll just bring a lot of examples. I'll go quickly through, because honestly, the archive really is just examples of interventions that people took every day, really. But this was the first day of this was the opening of the shelter on Aetna Street. It ended up being, people on Aetna Street really told people who were in support, being like, okay, what would it mean to support us? We need you all to shut that shit down. Including LASA, which was very controversial at the time, because advocates were like, why would you block people that are there to provide housing? And we had to really kind of sit with that question. It was a dilemma for us, because we were like, shit, they're asking us to do, to block everything. And what is that? Why? And people were saying that, they're like, that's the cover that they use to do all the destruction. So LASA is a really key component in that. The individual workers, might not like it, but that's what their role is. So people on Aetna Street had a really tight analysis of what was actually going on, that we had to learn from and adapt from and be like, no one's allowed through. Which caused, they brought in sheriff's buses, people had to block the streets for 8 hours. And what it ended up with were people on Aetna Street that week were spared, but they went to another encampment that was far more vulnerable, where again, city workers knew that someone was in the hospital recovering from a stab wound, and they knew that person wasn't there. And so they felt entitled to take their stuff away because they were not there to claim their own property. And to do that, it took 40 cops to surround one tent, which really told us what we're dealing with, right? That was just one Thursday in Van Nuys in 2020. And each of those encounters, every one of those Thursdays, gave us more information on how the city will dedicate endless resources. They will use whatever they've got to individually target people living in tents. And so we had to learn how to fight effectively, right? Because we were committed to disrupting that, but it looks, week to week, it looks different. I want to share artwork from another, from Whitney, who lived on Aetna Street. No one, like I said before, no one lives there now because it's completely fenced off and is now closed off for the next 3 years because they're building a double-decker station there in Van Nuys in time for the Olympics that no one asked for. And so now that public space is cut off to everyone. It's a fucking shame, and none of us knew about it. People who are dedicated, who are from that neighborhood, none of us knew that this happened. They announced it on a Monday, and by Friday it was closed off. So the real lack of, like, I want to say one of the consequences too from Echo Park Lake, where there might have been some communication now, like the city believes it does not have to answer to anyone. It doesn't, they don't even like have that illusion of like a dialogue or a conversation. So nothing is in our hands right now in terms of like city plans, which is why street resistance is really key. It's why, I'll just read this. This is, Whitney's tent is a 24/7 protest. So her message really kind of tells you what time it is on the block, on the clock of the world. But this was after Aetna Street was closed, and she was threatened with arrest and lost her things so many times. LAPD, Caltrans, sweeps, and city council murdered me and countless others. Wake up. And so people would pull over and engage Whitney on what this means. People were mad that it was visible. They wanted her to take it down. They called the city to clean it up. People didn't want to see what is. And Whitney used her own, like, this is her life, you know, like her life is dedicated to like informing people on like what's actually going on. And the kind of risks, obviously, like the consequences of that. And when there isn't anything, when she doesn't have pen or paper, this is a copy of a citation. It reads, it's for 4118, it's for blocking ADA. So it's a disabled person who's being cited for blocking ADA access on a street where no one walks on, but people live on. It's also for being in possession of a shopping cart without store permission. She signs it under duress. And after that happened, people started signing their name under duress, identifying themselves as under duress. When LAPD comes and asks their names, even though they know their names and everything they can get about them through just, honestly, through Circle, who would come and get everybody's names, put it on a list, and you'd never hear from them. They turn that information into LAPD, which when we talk about the non-complicity or like the right to say no, like obviously people on the streets have no fucking right they don't have the right to even say no thank you. If you say no thank you, you're getting a ticket or you're getting arrested. But for those weeks when it was really, really intense, like people would collectivize and everyone was under duress. Everyone's first name under, last name duress. And that was after people had all of their art supplies, everything stripped from them, and all they had was, you know, what they signed on the bottom of the citation. So those are just some examples. I also want to just talk about the fence, because whenever we're presented with a fence, which is what the city gave us, for every community that dared to organize themselves, they were met with a fence, right? I want to say, we've learned to look at fences a little bit differently. A fence is a vulnerability, right? Like if that's one of the city's tools, like
that presents an opportunity and a deep vulnerability. Although we know on the other side of that fence is a gun, right? So we know how incredibly, we know what that means for us, but we also know it opens up a world of possibilities for us. And it was many hands who took down those fences. It wasn't, the city didn't do that, people did. And I want us to, we've had to learn to look at these fences differently, right? Because they also, again, want that to be the end of the story. And so the first thing we had to look at was like everywhere we saw a fence was a community, people lived here. But we shouldn't get complicit in that. I feel very strongly about not being, it's a complex one. I don't know if we'll be able to get into this in like the context of this panel, but like the grief that, you know, we all have to feel and experience, like it doesn't just end there. I think they'd love for us to just mourn people, and we're here, we're here to actually fight, and we're here to actually change things. And that is the thing, like that is what each of us want to be remembered. Forgot to mention this, but Tony, who I talked about earlier, that was his jacket a month before he passed away. And this is a practice, like why we have archives or why we inherit stuff is because people would give us things that were precious to them, that said, this is going to get trashed, I'm going to lose this. Please hold on to this and do something with it. Do something with it. And I'm looking at my friend who painted that jacket, who also, you know, this is part of what we have to do, because these aren't just, we don't, yeah, it's not just to remember for the sake of remembering, and that is my, like, what I want us to think about how we get through, like how actually the archives activate us. And that was one thing, when we print this out and like we paste it on the walls on Aetna Street every time they do a sweep, we make sanitation scrub and take it down themselves. It's like you're going to have to be met with everybody who has ever lived here, every person who's walked this street who contributed something here. We're going to, when we cannot block the sweep, we're going to force you to remember with us. And for us, it doesn't matter if they don't care, right? They make fun of us. They don't give a shit at the end of the day, but it does something for us to hear Queen's words. Like that mobilized hundreds of people that night. Like that changed things for so many of us. So that's, to me, sorry, I went into my like little weird like story time kind of situation. So I'll stop there, but thank you. There's so many interventions, right? So every opportunity, what can one person do? What can 2 people do? What can 3 people do? What can 4 people do? Learning how to do that, like what is within your power and how to maximize that, always.
I'm gonna make this.
I just want to, I'm so sorry. I just want to do a little time check. I know we were going to go 5 to 6 on this panel, but I want to check in and see how people are feeling.
Oh yeah, it's only 6.
That people, if you're feeling good, of course, if you're not and you need to leave because you have a fancy outing you have to go to tonight, that's fine. But yeah, just want to acknowledge that we're going over a little bit and really looking forward to hearing the rest of it. Take it away, Paisley.
Cool. I'll try to keep this brief. And that was a beautiful, I mean, Carla really hit the nail on the head with a lot of things, but I think I've been thinking a lot about how creativity and art and imagination are like the antidote to bureaucracy and the violence of our capitalist, imperialist, extractive society. And Carla very much named, you know, the different forms that these interventions and artistic, specifically interventions, can take. And I thought a lot about not just we as artists, not just what we're making, like what we're talking about, which is important and is influenced by our experiences and is, you know, rich. But I think that's where art has been, and it's been, you know, commodified. And like I said, like the only way I can live as an artist and is by living unhoused, right? It's not really set up to like just create for the sake of it, but also to think of like not just what we're making, but how we're making it and who we're making it with. And I wanted to, an idea that I have yet to act upon, but I do plant this as a seed for all the artists in this room, as a direct response to something like Pathway Homes, displacement, RFQ, where they're like, hey, let's beautify it. We're going to displace the community and try to beautify it and put up what we call hostile architecture. So it's the spikes that you see, it's the planters, the hideous fences, the barrels, the like sandbags, whatever. Like they're just like, you look around the city and you'll start to see them if you haven't already. The like third prongs and the benches that make it uncomfortable, even impossible to sleep on. All of those are intended to make it inhospitable to live, inhospitable to stay, to sit, as a city that criminalizes, right, our existence. I thought of a free open project, an open RFQ of friendly architecture to look at those city installed just hideous looking things. They're just hideous, and they're like across the board, right? Like visually and spiritually, they're hideous and violent. And how could we as artists turn that into something else, something that perhaps, at least at the very least, sends a message, on what it says, on how it says that, like, hey, people used to live here, but also, like, well, I wonder if there's ways in which we can make it so people can live there again, ways in which you pour cement or you apply plywood or whatever it is, to turn these inhospitable locations into hospitable ones. Granted, the city will come and probably destroy that pretty quickly, right? But getting that, documenting it, sharing it, and making a point, and that we as artists go beyond creating art for ourselves and our immediate communities, but thinking of like what art at its purest is capable of doing. And another way that can apply very tangibly and perhaps less illegally, I don't know the legality of it, is that, it very much isn't getting involved with mutual aid organizations, of which I know at the end of this panel we'll have, a few you can connect with. You can connect with some of us, and we can always plug you in with folks in different parts of the city. But that all of these groups could love artists and need artists to graphic design, to come and play music at our community nights and our distributions and things. It makes a world of difference. It's about how we're making a new world together. And to do that, it takes all of us, and art is like the foundation of it. Again, it's like, I thought a lot about how our society tells us that as we grow up, you're not allowed to play anymore, and unless you can, really like make it in like an industrialized version of whatever art form you're trying to do, be it painting or film or music, unless you're able to like play that game, grow up and get a real job, and look at the society that creates, and look at the soul suckingness that it creates. In a world where even if you do get a job in one of those industries, I used to work in a post-production house before I moved out and quit my job to play music, and that company, I knew it was going to go under, and as of this week it went under. The company, people who worked there were told on Friday via email that the company was closing on a Monday, and that was all the notice they got. Take your severance and go find another job. So all we know, and I'm sure I'm speaking to a crowd that has probably experienced this or knows someone who has, right? Like, if you do make it in the industry, that is not a stable, that is not a sustainable thing either. So what is the new world that we're building together? And it starts on the streets, and it starts with building with the folks who are doing it and collaborating. So.
I'll try to be brief. I thought about it in two ways. The first, maybe picking up from what Paisley said, it's what we dare to want and imagine, and that art is very foundational to that. And so at Puma, we try and honor as much as we can people's everyday resistances that might not look like much. Even if it is considered antisocial behavior, if I'm in distress and I am yelling on the street, that is my expression. Like that is a very normal response to your conditions. And too bad that the rest of you feel too proper to not express themselves how they want to express themselves. I should say that I go to a lot of housewarmings of folks who I meet who live on the street, and they don't produce the crappy art that was just described. It's very personal, it's very close to them, and it's also, you know, there's the everyday tagging and tearing up of the signs and how dare you and what have you. And it seems to me that my responsibility as somebody who doesn't live there is, if I have chalk or a Sharpie, give it to you and get out the way if I have it. You know, that I think we should honor more of that type of everyday disruptive behavior, even if it doesn't have an obvious, like, this is the revolution or this is the way out, you know. We still learn a lot from each other from doing that. And I personally think a well-placed, tagged Free Palestine is better than anything I'm going to see at the Broad any day of the week. So that to me is art. And then the other thing, maybe picking up on what Carla said, we had a sweep on Jasmine's Street last year, and what CD5 decided is to kindly, they thought that this was a form of kindness, inform people that they could move a street over to a demolition site. They were going to offer porta potties, and that this was their kindness. Yeah, it really was. And so what we've learned to do a little bit is community surveys and have deep discussions and close relationships with folks, find out what they deeply want. Sometimes people do want to move, but in this particular case, people really wanted to stay. And for 3 weeks, we showed up, a lot of people in this room, that is to say community is super important, showed up to week after week after week. And what was offered at the end of it was the interim housing that has all of these problems. But there was a lot to be learned there. For one, we always have to think about, even if your encampment or your home is dismantled, we have to think of some of what the successes are, or what we learned, as painful as some of these experiences are. That experience made organizers out of many of the unhoused folks who we met. Also, I should have mentioned I'm Kenyan, and part of the African experience is always like, who are your people? And CD5, when we all showed up, they got to know, like, these are these people's people. And that's, I think, so fundamental to making art that is collective and showing up in a collective way, is everywhere you go, it should be obvious, these are my people. I do not let my people just be here. I think a lot of the people who were new and unhoused and unsheltered on that street were also, you know, very surprised by the experience. We grew and learned a lot from the experience, and it was, we have ties that last forever, that go outside of what the violent CD5 decided for those 2 or 3 weeks. Like, no one can take that away. So yeah, I think that is important. And then I guess the last thing I will say is definitely, you know, there are all sorts of disruptions and interventions we can't talk about necessarily here, but do feel free to interrupt some of these electeds. I just saw the Mitchell Farrell letter up here, and I remember about 2 or 3 years ago, I had my 15-year-old student called Pace, because he showed up to, what was he running for, mayor? Anyway, he showed up there, and Pace said, "How dare you?" It was a 15-year-old who walked up, no other adult. Yes. Walked up and said, "How dare you?" and laid out every single thing. And that was powerful. Sometimes you have to interrupt these people. Yeah, just because this one individual gets to be in charge of, what is it, 250,000 people, which is absurd to me, but yeah. But I'll stop there.
I'll be super quick. I just think the After Echo Park Lake collective was an intervention, you know, and it was an intervention of artists, researchers, and other organizers, and honestly blending the line between those. And so I think also, you know, like art, like research, we're both speaking different types of languages that speak to different people. Art can speak truth to power, research can speak truth to power. We can find ways to work together, and if one is more resourced than the other, like the university can be this big pool of resources that I don't know where the fuck it goes, but you know, it doesn't go to me, but it's not going to PhD students. Well, some of it is, but we have a union. So, but I think we, you know, artists in residence, working with artists, finding ways to employ community members too. Like if you're studying a population, you should have like a community advisory board. You should be working with them. You should be trying to do peer-to-peer surveys, you know, and I think honestly, when you do that, when you get creative like that, the research can feel like art, and that's honestly like the best place for it to be, and I think we should be working and in conversation with artists more than we are currently. Yeah. So yeah, just big up to all the artists in the crowd, yeah, everyone here. So.
I want to take like a little inventory of like kind of some of the things that have been suggested. I'm going to use the mic. Yeah, just like this ability that art making, just the actual art making has to build capacity in your base, right? Yeah. And it's not just the practical capacity, it's the social emotional capacity, right? When you get to engage with your intellectual life and your creative life, beyond the conditions that you're forced to endure through a creative act, that builds real capacity. And then we have the space to like actually build power to take the things that we deserve to have, right? And so I really appreciate that. I really appreciate, Carla, this like practice, I'm gonna say it so many times, a practice of counter surveillance and direct action responses. That it's like constant, it's consistent, you all are always out there every day, every time, for every action, and they laugh, but there's a history that's being built that will be extremely difficult to deny, right? And then to establish the historical record, which I agree, like with research and blending research, archival work, and the making, the ephemera, the things that we make, the flat work that we make, the drawings, the signatures, right? What you're talking about, Ndindi, about like these like moments of eruption, right? That creates a historical narrative that's undeniable, and then to identify these vulnerabilities in the architecture, you know? And then I think in that to like take an aggression, a state aggression, and actually transform it into an opportunity for making something new and having it as a point of departure for the organizing, right? And that it keeps kind of coming back to that. So that's what I'm getting from this conversation. I really appreciate it. And just also like the relentless pressure, right? And then inside of that, like the mutual aid work really builds internal capacity to maintain relentless pressure so we can take breaks and we can take care of each other and we can make sure we're eating and getting enough rest and our people are cared for. Yeah, so I'm feeling really like excited and inspired by some of the ideas that have come up, and I want to give folks maybe like, if we want to, I know Carla, I feel like you want to add on to, did you have?
I'm curious what people
okay.
think.
Well, I guess I wanted to, because I know we want to be able to have time to like have smaller discussions or Q&A and get with our mutual aid folks to like plug in. And so I'm wondering if, like, very briefly, if we can go around and I guess I want to hear, like, one statement, and I'm going to put you on the spot because I'm going to say one statement, one sentence that defines for you as an artist / organizer, those, like, we're blending that. And I would argue you are an artist, actually.
Yes.
And I would argue that you're an artist, too. As a cultural worker, we're producing culture, right, at a very deep level. What, in one sentence, what is at stake for you personally in proceeding into this work and continuing this work in the committed way that you are? In one sentence. And then after that, we'll do a little Q&A, and then we'll be able to move around the room, and you can hit up all these folks for even more questions. So, anybody have something you want to go first? One sentence, what's at stake for you?
What's at stake?
Yeah.
I guess I'll start. Try to answer this with just what comes to my mind.
It's life or death. So that's what's at stake, literally. 6 people die on the streets every day, but also me personally, like it's life or death. It wasn't a choice to move into an RV. There was no other way I could see forward, not from these lands. It's life or death.
I guess I'll say I'm committed to live in right relationship with everyone and everything that's non-living in my planet. And so I have obligations as someone who has ancestors who've done those things before, and there are people who will come after me, and what's at stake is our relationships to each other and to land.
Yeah, community, I think, and like really cross-sectional community, I think, is at stake. I think too often, it's the housed and the unhoused, and LA, it's the people in the cars and then the people on the sidewalk, and any space that pushes against that and brings different people, different walks of life together, I think is ultimately, can be a productive space, and we should be fostering those, so, yeah.
I was going to say everything.
Yeah.
But I'm going to use another word for everything, the vessel. And us as vessels, but also our communities as vessels. And if we think about, all of us are on a vessel as humans, right? And how many of us are doing the labor and sustaining this, and then how many of us actually have any control as to where this vessel is going, what this vessel is doing to our communities, to our environment, to our bodies. So, yeah, that's as short as I can be.
I've come to understand sweeps, raids, enforcements, dismantling of encampments, communities as systems of family separation, and I believe it will require tapping into a very queer, long-ass tradition of like building families that cannot be separated, which requires relationship and risk and so much like a world where people do not only have what they need, but they get what they want. And that to me is like what's at stake. And to really challenge the system of family separation that we are currently living under, that is going to continue to try to rip us apart. Each of these struggles teach us a bit more about what that actually means and what's at stake. And to me, it's building a vision of family where we can't be torn apart.
So, any questions? We'll turn it back to you all.
I'm gonna be real. Charlie, keep it real. That's my hashtag. And I live in Skid Row as a black, trans, disabled. I can project. I'm a thespian. For the second person, actually, I loved your aura, and then you said something that I want to bring out. You were like, you kind of talked about identity politics, and then you're like, although you love the fact that you're from Oaxaca, right? Mm-hmm. Oaxaca, and that you love that, they're just, I feel like that's very white. I feel like that's very a white thing for us to assimilate to, because intersectionality is like, no, people are not just one thing. Yes, there's class war. In Skid Row, I see a lot of white people. But I also see black women get harassed more than them. I also see trans women not even get visualized as women. I also see sex workers and folks with addictions and mental. I've been drinking, so I'm gonna be real. I need to like calm it down. So I think about intersectionality. So where do you find intersectionality in the work that you do? There you go.
Thank you for the question. It's a really, it's one that I continuously deal with. As an artist and working in my communities, being aware, being fully self-aware and participating responsibly. So on my birthday, about a month ago, I showed work from Oaxaca for the first time. This specific project, it's called, sorry, I'm gonna take a minute for this one. This is called the project that started in 2021 called Nosotros. I stepped away from photography for 8 years after studying it for 13 years because I felt the photography was so in the Occidental lens and the Western world. It's so possessive. It's so about like this is mine. It's proving that I went somewhere and this memory is now mine and I can take it with me. And the last project I did before taking that 8-year gap was about my specific community, the Oaxaca community, being very intentional, not just journalistic in terms of like going to events, going to places, but actually being like going to a person and being like, hey, I want to document you, I want to talk to you, I want to be in your home with you. And I was like, I'm never going to show these pictures to anybody besides my community. So I stopped taking pictures for 8 years until COVID, and then I picked up a Polaroid camera that my mother had given me years ago. And at one point I was at the beach with a friend of mine, and it was a really, really far away beach. It was COVID, so hardly anyone was there. It was like 2 people every 10 meters, really spaced out. Everybody had blankets, everybody had picnic tables, everybody had umbrellas, and not picnic baskets. My friend and I were the brownest people there, so we were laughing the hardest, having the most fun. It was winter, so 3:30 p.m., the sun is gonna set at like 4, and there's a family of 4 comes down like the steep hill from PCH, and they don't have blankets, they don't have umbrellas, they don't have food, and it's like 3:30, 30 minutes before the sun sets, right? And I'm just thinking in my brain, was like, one of these parents just got off work, and they're like, let's just go to the beach, right? And the 2 daughters were like 8 and 12, were like holding onto their parents' arms, and like, I'm nice, I'm generally, nice. So I just waved. One of the girls, like her arm was gonna fly off, she was waving back, and I was like, I'm gonna go take that picture. And I put my mask on, went over there, I was like, hey, can I take a picture? The dad was already just like laying on the sand, and he's like, yeah, go take a picture. I'm like, no, I want everybody in the picture. He's like, all right. So they got in the picture, and I took 2, gave one to them, kept one. And I went back to my spot, said, thank you, nice to meet y'all. And I was watching the 2 daughters just like, and the word I can find best is surface. I was watching the 2 daughters just see themselves surface in this image, right? And I was like, this is a project. Like, I spent, that was volume 1 of the project. I spent 2 years taking pictures of people, giving one to them, letting people choose which one was theirs. Most of them were people that I did not know. Always carried like 10 pictures with me, like, this is the project you're doing. And it was the whole, volume 1 became a whole process of like, how do I explain this? What am I actually doing, right? And part of it was like recreating the photographic archive. I'm a really good photographer. So recreating the archive and be like, this is a picture by XYZ artist. It's a picture by this other artist. But here, that's all people of color. Here's people in the working class community. There was a volume 2 which I haven't shown. That I showed on the street corner from my house, from my apartment in KTown. Had a little collage project where you recreate the pictures that have like little outlines of iconic figures in the image, and you go out and find them, but then also use them to outline and put yourself in a collage. Volume 2 was more about filling in the gaps, right? Now that I had seen it out and laid it out, what am I missing? Volume 3 was in Oaxaca. So yes, a lot of these people were strangers, but they were also from my town, from my grandfather's town, from a neighboring town, right? And so if they were strangers, there was someone that's probably, they would ask you, where are you from? Who are your parents? Nubi Chile. And that's one of the few things that I can say in Zapoteco, the language that my parents speak, Vicha Rosa. I am the son of Rosa. And so I show these pictures on my birthday, February 9th, these pictures from 2022, 2023 in Koreatown, Oaxaca, Korean for the first time. And so to go back to the question about identity politics, there is a landmark that is officially a new landmark in LA. It's like almost a year old, El Corredor Oaxaqueño, which was put out, supported, has been chased for 10 years by ORO, Organización Regional Oaxaqueña, which is business owners. They're the ones who put on the Guelaguetza, which, if you ask me, the best metaphor for the Guelaguetza as it's practiced in Oaxaca, the Guelaguetza, not Guelaguetza Popular, which is put on by teachers as a form of resistance. But the Guelaguetza is a form, it's like Disneyland went to the mountains, to the Sierra, and put up their project, and they asked for tequios and cargos, they asked for support from all the towns, right? But then they have to pay to actually get inside, and then don't have any say as to what happens inside, right? So use the systems of solidarity that these towns, usos y costumbres, run by, but then actually, use that identity and charge them, and they have no say as to what happens. So the Corredor Oaxaqueño was chased by them for 10 years. Eventually, a year after, the Nuri Martinez tapes came up talking specifically about Oaxacans and about dividing the renting population, separating, redistricting, right? Then they're like, oh, you know what? Let's actually support this. Let's actually love the Oaxacan community, right? With the tenants union, we have marched to Heather Hutt's office because she does not pay attention, does not answer our emails, does not get back to us, does not support the tenants that are living in horrendous conditions. Tenants that have been on rent strike for 2 years. Thankfully, cases are settling now outside of court because the landlords are terrified to actually meet their tenants in court, right? So, but she shows up for the establishment. The Corredor Oaxaqueño shows up with a photo op. It's like, yes, I love Oaxacan people, right? Where have you been this entire time, right? So that is one geographic landmark in Koreatown, Corredor Oaxaqueño. Koreatown, as a place, also has another very important geographic kind of not specifically a landmark, but iconography. Not iconography. It has some of the highest rates of evictions in the county, Koreatown, right? So this Corredor Oaxaqueño, is it actually going to support tenants? No.
Right.
Is it going to support immigrants? No. Is it going to support indigenous communities? No. Is it going to support the working class? No. It's going to support the bourgeois Oaxacan owners, right? Who, never mind, that's a whole other topic. But what it is also going to do is continue supporting the gentrification, which is displacing the Oaxacan immigrants, the Oaxacan refugees, the Oaxacan transplants, right? Who were already displaced, right? Many of us are not here because we want to be, right? We're here because of policies by this empire that have displaced us. You know, Oaxaca has the second biggest biodiversity in all of Mexico, right? We have mines, we have water, we have culture, we have food, we have, you know, not everybody has water, and you know that's a big issue now, especially in the Valle, in the city. But how do we have the second biggest biodiversity in all of Mexico and also the second poorest people, right? It's absolutely fucking ridiculous. So to go back to like, how is this identity weaponized against us, right? How is it that we are, on one hand, encouraged to be proud of our identity, but on the other hand, forced to feel divided and like we're going against each other when in fact we are all suffering from the same imperialism. I've been talking about these things for a long time.
You didn't ask me this question, but I want to take this question very seriously because it's really important. But I want to just share how we've understood intersectionality on Aetna Street, because people have organized their community around vulnerability, and so like young kids would be at the front when where the city would first sweep or attack people, and older people with disabilities would hang in the back or live like this is how they literally organized their like home life, their space, their community around like their understanding who was the most vulnerable among them, and people there, like it's a deeply intergenerational community. People really are kind of bound together by disabilities of all kinds, which should be named. And Aetna Street's also like a deeply black space. It's where many black people like in the valley get pushed to by the city systematically through, we call it being unhoused because it's an active violent process. It's not just like, oh, I lost my housing. It's like, no, you were, like, it's a process that is incredibly violent. But people have ended up on Aetna Street and reclaimed that space, honestly. We're put there, but then reclaimed it as a black space of belonging. So have like forged that, like we take up space, and they're also, made a very intentional decision to become more a public, like part of a public movement. So it was like a fight for public space. Like Echo Park Lake made a conscious decision as a community to say, you know what, like we're not just reacting or like responding. This isn't a tragedy. This is actually like, this is the people, like this is resistance, and this is what it looks like, and this is like, we invite you. That's like the lesson to me was like Echo Park Lake, like what we heard Queen's words, like that's an invitation. And like for us, like our family grew up in Echo Park Lake and had been for generations on my dad's side, and we had been displaced. And so when we go to Echo Park, it's like kind of like a punch in the face, because we go back there and we're like, we don't like, it's not, we know we're not welcome there. And it was actually like the community at Echo Park Lake who were like living in tents, who were inviting people back, who had like lost their housing, who lost their community, lost their connection. They invited people back, and that's what forged my friendship with Queen, and like, but also she taught me to see, my own city, my own neighborhood, like what I like, the community that I fight for and defend. And you can only defend it, you can only fight for it on this level if you love it, right? And hate it. It's both, because you have but you have to know it.
Family's complicated.
very complicated. But I want to say, so intersectionality on Aetna Street looks like people really understanding what makes us vulnerable, and like how do we really protect each other, knowing that. And they also were really loud on that street, were very active politically, because they were also defending streets that were quieter, that were not resisting in the same ways because people were undocumented. And so they were like, we're gonna be over here making a whole lot of fucking noise, and recognizing, you know, that there are streets nearby where people had to take different, like had different risks. And so there's like a deep understanding, right, of like all the ways in which people are being criminalized, have to operate, you know, in all these alternative networks to survive and to help each other. And so like those networks that go really deep, and why we call, like, you know, we call this aiding and abetting unhoused communities, and we mean that. Like Fremont has criminalized that. I mean, that's not just coming for LA, that's part of a long history of criminalizing anyone that supports like who they're going after, right? So that's we're already seeing this like play out right now with the raids. And like one thing that terrifies, you know, I think, I wasn't gonna say the word civil war, but I was just saying like when, like right now, I was like where you have these community patrols and like this fight for self-determination, it reminds me of when there was very intense eviction defense work that many of us, like that I learned to organize through the LA Tenants Union. When you see people spill out on your block because they know that someone is about to be evicted and they refuse to let someone fall into that, like that's an incredibly powerful act. And so all of our neighborhoods have that like incredible capacity. That's what building these networks, as difficult as it is, it's actually, I feel like the city always makes it seem like it's a burden, or like it's actually a joy to be able to be like, how do we build that resistance? How do we help it grow? How do we help it catch? And so it doesn't even feel like work. When you're doing this in a way where it feels like, you know, this is all of our work, it's all of our responsibility. Like it just is part of, it's like breathing, and that's it. It becomes something else. But yeah, the ways, you know, like Aetna Street teaches us about the intersectionality. What Queen was saying in her speech around like, she was talking about, she channeled, clearly, like she channels, and like a lot of people, I really appreciate you naming like just neurodivergence and like addiction and mental illness, because we need to make so much more space in this world. Like our movements fail to actually really honor like people's like life experiences. Like we are not like at the level we need to be to really crack this shit wide open so like people can participate. People who like, you know, like that's I think the task at hand for us, is to really like, you know, and we learned that from encampments like Aetna Street, where they like, everybody was accepted, which made that shit, that was like, you know, next level work and responsibility. That means it's like a commitment, like without like any resources, like people have had to develop like their own, we call them programs because that's what they are. Like people have developed their own harm reduction like programs and models that save life, and like they're just not sanctioned, right? They're not like approved by the city, but like people have been doing, like that's one thing that will continue to happen, is people are going to continue to do the life-saving work and do what needs to be done, and those communities need to be supported and resourced with all of our, like all that we have, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so, sort of a question. Oh, did you say, Paisley and Carla, that they just closed off the entire Aetna Street, like public space? Yeah. And with the guise of this like needed Olympics, because it's so ironic and horrifying in Venice. After 8 years and approvals up and down, of course, they have, this, what's her name, Tracy Clark, that council person. With the mayor and the city attorney, have decided to shut this down at all costs, right?
Yeah.
The Venice Scale project. But the most recent thing they're using is exactly that. We need a transit hub, right? And for the Olympics, which of course they don't. We don't. And believe me, those people with money living adjacent are not going to want a transit hub, right? Any more, well, maybe more than low-income people. Hard to say. But I'm just curious if we should be working together on this, and if anyone else is, if it's happening anywhere else, because it looks like it's like a strategy, right? It's insane.
Anyone from the Olympics here? There's definitely work being done around that and has been for a while. We should.
Well, I don't just mean Olympic stuff. I mean this thing.
Well, yeah, like around like the infrastructure development that's going to get fast tracked, and then also the sweeps are going to increase.
But they're hitting up on these really
Yes.
powerful.
Yeah.
They picked two really, really powerful places to fuck with, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just,
There is something that the city did. They took where historic encampments were, where people have lived for decades, and they placed these bridge home shelters on top of them, displacing those communities. What happened over the last 5 years was it didn't go quite according to plan because there was resistance from unhoused people at all those sites, but they picked 12 sites that the city projected. Shelters are temporary, right, by design. And so you can put one up for a year. You can have a very disingenuous plan, which is exactly what the city did. It said, we're gonna put a shelter here. And then 2 years, people are gonna forget about it and forget about all the people, right, that got kicked out of it. And then that leaves it just ripe for the taking, right? It's like, so when we're talking about the art washing, it's like it's the total like elimination of people, like, and they did that like systematically through these bridge home shelters in Venice, and that's why we have to connect, because those 12 places where they did this, at El Pueblo, in Van Nuys, on Aetna, in Venice, we were all connected through our organizing. At one point there was like connected resistance. That's like, that can be like built, like it's why we're telling these stories, is because it's like, we lose a lot, but it's also like, it's right there. It's always about the land. And it's always about the people that the city feels is in the way, right? It's that simple. And those sites, like, that's why we call them sacred. Like, Aetna Street is sacred because thousands of people have lived on this street, have like engaged in like a war they didn't ask for, but then become conscious around being like, we're actually defending people's right to exist. We are a part of that tradition. And I know that happened in Venice. Like and it was really powerful when people talked a little bit about attack, but when people start to cross-pollinate or visit one another and like actually learn that the same shit that's happening here in Venice, it's happening in Van Nuys, and it's always about criminalizing sex workers, it's always about criminalizing drug users, it's always about building guardianship over making the case that people cannot take care of themselves, right? It's always about that. And so that took place on like very specific geographic areas. Like that took place in places where they want to turn the neighborhood inside out, so that none of us like have access to it. And that's what's happening in Van Nuys right now. Like no one asked for that. Van Nuys is a community, like that immediate community is fighting for showers and laundry. Like people can't afford shit. They didn't ask for a double-decker metro station. Like that is an act of class war against a largely undocumented immigrant population. I got excited when you mentioned Mary Martinez because on Aetna, I got excited because she's obviously a racist piece of shit, but it's important to note in our history because You know, Nuri Martinez used her identity as a Latina woman to usher in this like era of change, and she was the biggest hater of people on Aetna Street. And when she took her own self out through her own racist ass, people on Aetna Street felt like some vindication. They were like, we're a part of that. Yeah, they were like, this was the most racist fucking lady, like, she was against all of us, and it was like, it was all there, like, written and said. I want to just note one example of, like, countering the art washing or the, like, cultural erasure was that people used to steal Nuri Martinez's banners, like, that held her, like, she had that big, nasty pink font that said Nuri Martinez, Congressional District Councilperson, like, whatever, number 6. People would steal those banners to use for tarps. And like the only time the city came to Aetna Street was to take back those, like she brought her aides in, and we'd be in a tug of war fighting for those banners because tarp is really expensive, right? So we would be in a tug of war, and then we would like look to our left, look to our right, and then we'd let go. We'd fall on their ass. You know, and like we said, I was like, you know, someday they're gonna fall. And she did, and there was 8 months, there was a period where like no one was in a position of authority to do sweeps. And in that 8 months, like people did some of the like raddest shit we'd ever seen. Like it was, Echo Park Lake was its own thing. I, you know, resist kind of the comparisons, but like Aetna Street was able to like accomplish some of the goals. Like people on that street are builders, like very, very skilled builders. And so people were able to build communal resources and things like that when they were like uninterrupted, when they were like not being forced to take down their shit and get it thrown away in the dumpster every week. So like imagine like what people were able to do in 8 months. That's when people started really talking about their health. Like we started really talking about community health. We started linking up with All Power Free Clinic, and really being like, how do we build models and visions that like actually moves the needle on like quality of life for people like in our neighborhood. Like we actually have the power to address that. Like we don't need to wait for anyone to do that work, and that like you need that space in your brain. Like that's what all the mutual aid work is fighting, so people can have some space in their minds to be able to like think, dream, like build. Like that's like, and if you're denied food, if you don't have like shelter, it's really difficult to do that, obviously, by design, but like it's not impossible. And so people have been able to do this like without any of those things. But imagine if people actually were not interrupted at every, you know, at every corner to do that. And I think that's what we hold on to, being like, imagine if you had, we think about time a lot, because they're like, time moves differently in these spaces. But like, what if you had 3 months? What if you had 6 months? And like, we try to extend it out for like 30 years. We're like, oh, what could be accomplished in a generation, like 30 years? What if we had it? And how do we ensure that we vet it?
Something that came to mind as you were speaking, and it goes back to the previous question of like, what is at stake? The question that I think is similar is, where is the front line? And I think that, you know, it's a lot of these spaces, right? But then I also think about the relationship and the narrative put out by the media, put out by the empire. For example, the recent fires in Los Angeles, right? And people talking about these people lost their homes, lost everything, right? You know, don't have showers, don't have bathrooms, don't have, you know, whatever. And then, but nobody has ever talked about that, at least publicly. The media doesn't ever talk about like, there are people facing that every single day, right? Have been, and that is normalized, right? But for these people, because it's not their fault that the fire burnt their homes down, right? To say nothing about the toxic relationship that California has with land and where they shouldn't be building.
Okay.
And you know, with the fact that it's mostly people, you know, white people with privilege that are doing these things, ignoring the responsible relationships that we should have with the land, and doing it anyway, and then getting tax cuts or getting tax breaks, or then getting, you know, money from the city. You know, I'm also thinking of what's it called? That thing in France that burned, and they got a shit ton of money immediately. Yeah, right. And then thinking about like, what about all our other community spaces that have been on fire forever, right? Where are you then?
Yes.
How many Notre Dames have burned, right? Like, And every day is a wildfire.
How many archives?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that I'm living in Altadena, Pasadena, and I've been thinking about this like since we knew it was going to start, right? Like we have lots of folks in our neighborhood. Every day is a wildfire. Every single day I'm recovering from wildfire. Yeah, it's really difficult to like bear witness to those kind of stark contradictions in response. And so I guess in considering the responsibility of response, we wanted to thank our panelists first for the really beautiful. And then, here, I'll do this. And then kind of end with turning that response back to you all and kind of prompting a little assignment, small assignment. So we have our fence, our Echo Park Lake fence, which is all fences, right? And because that became such a site of sort of political discourse and political speech in the neighborhood, including Gustavo Otsoy, who posted a sign on the fence, and you could see it pictured hanging there now. He was actually arrested for putting the sign on the fence. But it became a really important moment in his struggle and his political consciousness development that he talked about a lot, just like the experience of like putting your speech into public and then feeling and experiencing that pushback from the state, but then to keep proceeding, keep moving forward and keep going. And so for today, we have a couple things. The first assignment is please try to link up with somebody who's in your neighborhood that you don't know, or in the general area who's doing this mutual aid work, and we're gonna have a lot of folks who'll be able to like connect you and plug you in. But then one little assignment is today, there's some paper and markers and things at the foot of the fence, and if we can just kind of consider all the things that were shared here tonight, and then before you leave today, to post something on the fence, some kind of commitment, some kind of goal. This is what I'm gonna do tomorrow. This is what I'm gonna do next week. Or this is a way that I can integrate some of these questions and considerations into my practice as a cultural worker. And then you can post that there for folks to see. Take a picture of it too so you don't forget and you can remember. But it's just also that the public political speech also gives us a way to be accountable to each other, right? Because we make it very visible and we see it.
There's also sign-in sheets if you didn't sign up.
Oh yes, please do sign in.
There's sort of sign-in sheets so we can continue being in touch.
Yeah. And I thank you all, friends, for being here, and yeah.